Oh.
Good evening, everyone. We are having a little bit of a challenge with one of our panel members, and we are trying to sort that out. We are also waiting for a couple more participants. So as they come in, thank you very much for being in on time. We will just let them connect. Dr. Roop, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So, as we wait for Dr. Rajam to join in, what I'm going to do is I am going to start the conversation for now. And we will let Dr. Rajam join in. I believe she's having some internet challenges right now. So hopefully that will be sorted out soon. This is a challenge of this medium, and things can happen from time to time. So thank you very much to everyone for being here today and making the time to participate in our first webinar in the series of Compassionate Caring. I would like to start by introducing to you Caregiver Sathi. Many of you might be familiar with our organization, but it is worth its while that we tell you a little bit about ourselves. So Caregiver Sathi is a social venture. It is an organization that aims to create an ecosystem of well-being and healing for the primary caregiver. The family caregivers, or the unpaid family members who are caregivers to those navigating terminal illness, chronic, or any other life-limiting conditions, have their unique challenges. And we support them through their caregiving journeys. And we wish to enable them by creating an environment of well-being by empowering the caregiver. We believe that the caregiver and the care receiver or the patient must get an opportunity to lead full lives. How do we do this? We do this primarily through three ways. One is the psychosocial support systems like easy access to information, relevant content, healing circles or support groups, one-on-one counseling and coaching, volunteer programs that provide respite care and that help caregivers through their caregiving journeys, and thirdly, technology-based support to enable and empower caregivers in their well-being. I'm delighted to have two of our biggest supporters in this panel discussion. And one of them is here. The other one is having some internet challenges, and hopefully she will join soon. And at that moment, she is online. So, Dr. Rajam, hopefully you are online. And I will start with introductions. Dr. Roop Gursahani has been a long time specialist in neurology, has worked as the head of Department of Neurology at Nair Hospital and TN Medical College from 91 to 94. Is the honorary associate professor in neurology at Grant Medical College and CJJ Hospital. Was during the period 98 to 2012. In addition to clinical neurology, his main interest is in epilepsy and EEG. He is associated with the Epilepsy Clinic on the Lifeline Express. He is the founder trustee of FINE, the Forum for Indian Neurology Education, which organizes teaching courses in neurology. He's on the steering committee of ELICIT, ELICIT, the interdisciplinary task force of intensivists, palliative care physicians, and neurologists for end-of-life care in India. Thank you very much for making the time to be here, Dr. Roop. And
thank you, Bhavna.
We also have with us Dr. Rajam Iyer. She's a consultant pulmonologist and a palliative care physician, currently consulting with Bhatia and Hinduja hospitals in Mumbai. She's also done her fellowship in palliative care. She focuses on non-cancer palliative care. Welcome, a very warm welcome to both of you. We are delighted to have you.
Nice to see so many people on the call today, which is a good thing to start.
Yes. I'm so glad. I was having little butterflies about the internet connectivity at your end. So glad that that's behind us. I did a brief introduction to Caregiver Sathi while that was on, and I would like to open the conversation with you, Dr. Roop, and ask you about what are the associations, or what is your understanding and experience with caregivers that you have found in your practice?
In my practice, well, I deal with dementia, Parkinsonism, motor neuron disease, and other diseases that afflict people from the nervous system side. And probably the first is an explicit statement that I make sometime towards the course of the illness to the family caregiver, that for me, you are as much my patient as your patient is. That my commitment is to your patient as part of a family, not to the patient as an individual alone. It's not that I wish them ill. I don't want them to be my patients in that sense. Yes, but I have a responsibility to seeing that the family is the circle of caregiving around the patient is maintained. And that commitment needs to come up front from the person, from the clinician, fairly quickly.
Dr. Rajam, what would you say about, who do you think are caregivers, and do you believe that caregivers see themselves as caregivers?
So it's first of all, good afternoon to all of you, and I think it's an extremely important session that Bhavna initiated, especially during this lockdown phase. In the past 4 to 5 weeks, I have seen more than the patients, the caregivers being extremely anxious about the care that they are providing to their chronically ill patient. family member, sorry, especially because I think the routine work as such, the elective work has kind of come to a grinding halt, and the healthcare system is also struggling with COVID, non-COVID, and it's therefore resulted in a lot of patients who have been chronically ill before the COVID crisis have been neglected, or those who require continuing attention, those have been neglected like any patient with a chronic illness. And I think the caregivers' stress levels has gone up a lot because they don't know whom to contact. Their regular line of treatment is kind of derailed. The hospitals are not, kind of welcome to all these patients. Plus, I think the staff, in the sense, the ayabais, the ward boys, your domestic help, all these have kind of come to a grinding halt, and that has worsened the stress on the caregiver. Plus, suppose even if you had a supportive family, I think the brothers and sisters have not been able to reach you. So you're kind of stuck alone with this parent or grandmother or sibling or whoever it is. So I think this whole situation has worsened it. And I think caregivers, therefore, are extremely burdened today, which I can see from the response. And it's more and more important at this stage to handhold and support the caregivers, because it automatically reflects on the overall caregiving for the patient. Because even if the patient knows this condition, I think the stress levels kind of passes on. So I'm glad that there's a great turnout, and I really appreciate the fact that we want to support you. So please do feel free about asking your questions. And whenever the time is this thing, I'll kind of share an experience I've had over the past 2 days about talking to a completely new patient on the video phone, and even that makes a huge difference for the patient and the family. But we'll discuss that when the time comes. Thanks, Bhavna.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajam. So what I'm going to do is, this medium of webinar and Zoom calls might be something that all of us are very familiar with, and yet it might be new for many of us. So I'm going to take a little pause and request Anish, who's on this call, to make some admin announcements so that we can all stabilize and join and make the most of this medium and the next hour or so that we have. Anish?
Thanks, Bhavna. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So, couple of hygiene announcements. I request everybody to keep their microphone on mute to avoid any background sounds while the panelists are having the discussion. At the appropriate stage, where we have a more interactive session, there, we will unmute the people as and when they are invited to share. Just want to reassure everybody that we've taken, as you would have realized, a number of appropriate security precautions. We've also used third-party endpoint encryption, which in simpler language just means that whatever we are talking here would not be going outside the meeting. And we have 3 sections of this overall webinar, which Bhavna will introduce. And we will give instructions as appropriate for each section. I do want everybody to know that the webinar is being recorded. And while we are recording this webinar, some of the sections, which are the panel discussions, may be used later for sharing with the larger caregiving community, but nothing from the participant interaction will be discussed publicly. So please feel free to participate as much as you feel like, because those parts of the webinar will not be shared. So for this section, the first section, which is the panel discussion, everybody should be on mute, and only the host and the panelists will be participating. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So just to reiterate, there will be 3 sections. We will have a discussion and move on to a question answer session, and then there will be a feedback and suggestions. So Dr. Roop, uh, the kind of conditions that you interact with, or the patients and the kind of conditions that they have, actually require sometimes very long-term care and sometimes very difficult looking after. In your experience, what have you found that, what is the biggest challenge that caregivers have? Maybe you can take one or two conditions and take us through what their challenges are.
I think the first challenge for the caregiver is to recognize what is happening, to recognize that this is a illness which has no cure, that you can care, you can uh, give love, affection, all of that, but you're not going to be able to cure the person that you are caring for, neither you nor the doctor. So the first challenge is to understand that and accept that, and then go on beyond that.
Mm.
The second challenge, I think, really relates to the individual disease. And for me, for neurological illnesses, if you look at dementia, if you look at Parkinsonism, if you look at somebody who's had bad strokes, there is also the change in the person that you loved and that you're caring for.
Mm.
That personality will have changed significantly, and sometimes may have changed to the point that it is no longer the person that you knew earlier.
Mm.
And yet, and that person, even worse, may stop even recognizing you.
Mm.
Uh, so, at that point, to realize that what you are doing, the care that you are giving because of your memory of who that person was,
Mm.
not necessarily that that becomes very difficult to accept.
Mm.
So, and that is why taking care of patients with neurological illnesses
Mm.
is hugely difficult, because for almost everything else, whether it's a heart problem or a lung problem or even cancer,
Mm.
as long as it doesn't affect the brain, to a
Mm.
large extent, the patient is the same patient, the same person.
Mm. That's true, and that's quite heartrending, right? Because there is
Yeah.
a certain quality of a loss of a relationship, and maybe grief around that, and
Yes.
and it can be quite difficult to have to bring up this conversation um, with anybody. Do you find that caregivers bring up this as a conversation with you when you're a doctor?
Mm,
You do.
no. And that's why I brought this up right up front,
Mm. Mm.
because for neurological patients, this is something that is, I think, um, people complain about behavior problems and so on.
Mm.
But beyond the behavior problems is also the sense that that person that they knew is fading.
Mm.
And behavior problems, of course, also occur because um, it's a little tricky in this almost like a dance where you're dancing with somebody who's fading into the shadows,
Mm.
to uh, to know exactly what is right at a given time. And I think it's good if families can discuss this with the doctor.
That's an interesting point that you make. So, um, Rajam, do you find that people bring up the conversation about their role and their responsibility or their challenges with doctors?
So again, Dr. Roop pointed a very interesting concept in neurology, that it's also the changed perspective. But I think in India as a country, somehow caregiving to a large extent is still accepted or considered to be duty, and not that everybody is lucky to have people around them. But suppose you have an elderly parent or a child who's not well, it's just considered um, the fact that you are meant to look after. It's not the quality of care as such, it's that you're meant, whether it's financially, socially, or whether you house them in your home and you get help, etc. It's different level of caring. Or but I think also at the same time, somewhere caregivers, if they vent their frustration, anger, irritation, depression, their change in social life, is not something that happens, and it's not considered a very healthy thing. For example, very often it will be a coffee table conversation that such and such person's son is being so bad or daughter is being so bad. It's not something, nobody actually looks at caregiving also as something that can be extremely demoralizing, extremely physically and emotionally tiring. And nobody thinks that caregivers also need a break, and that caregivers also need a respite, especially in chronic illnesses like Dr. Roop mentioned, dementia 10 years, Parkinson's 10 years. They take a toll on the caregiver also. So the society doesn't appreciate caregivers having a emotional vent. There isn't much support offered to caregivers. There are people who say, oh dear, it must be tough for you, but there's nothing more beyond that. So it is very, very rare that there are people who come and say, look, I really need a break. I am going to have a nervous breakdown. I can't look after my mother, father, grandmother. It can't go on like this. It's not appreciated by society. It's not appreciated by family. And to doctors, we doctors are not trained to handle the fallout emotionally of caregivers either. We hardly are able to deal with emotions of our patients. So there is no training as such in our training where we actually look at the caregiver and say, are you coping? Very often patients have actually, caregivers have been very surprised that I shift the focus from patient to caregiver and ask, are you coping?
How we
And
are doing.
not that I have a solution, but the fact that I asked, at least address the fact that the caregiving is as important as giving the tablets to the patient. It's not enough just to dish out the prescription. The caregiver does so much more emotionally, physically, keeps awake, changes his routine, changes his shift. There's so much you miss out on life just looking after somebody who's chronically ill at home. So it's not appreciated to be, the fact that caregivers have needs too.
Yeah, so like we have social cultural norms that family is expected to look after, and that's your duty. We do have lots of stories in our mythology that put caregiving on a pedestal, and I think therefore it's a part of our fabric that caregiving has to be done, and it has to be done with a certain standard. Dr. Roop, there's a question also in the chat box, which is about, how do you break the news with the patient, because they find that many times caregivers become protective and they don't want to share the news of whatever the prognosis is with the patient.
I think that's to some extent, a cultural thing.
Mhm.
I'm talking to some extent from the doctor's point of view, and somewhere it begins from doctors who do not want to foresee and to foretell. Okay, it's a little. It's something that people don't realize, but modern medicine is something that is barely about 60 or 70 years old, really. If you look at antibiotics, if you look at intensive care, if you look at all that we do today, it started off somewhere in the 1950s, 60s, and after that. Before that, if you became seriously ill, you went to hospital to get nursing care. If you were lucky, you came out. If you're unlucky, that was it.
Yeah.
Now, after the 1950s, people actually started to recover.
Mm.
Okay, but obviously not everybody did. But whatever it was, medical culture changed. How did it change? Well, before that, a doctor really had three duties. One was diagnosis. That's obvious that you have to see, identify the illness, give it a name,
Process.
and then you had to put together the treatment.
Mm.
But the third duty was what we called prognosis.
Mm.
कि अब क्या होगा,
Mm.
आगे क्या है. So as we became more and more successful in our treatments,
Mm.
and you look at it now, I mean, people with pneumonia now would hardly ever die. Once upon a time, if you got pneumonia, that was it.
Mm.
So um, since treatment became bigger and bigger, and diagnosis also became bigger,
Mm.
prognosis started to dwindle. So
Mm.
doctors literally lost the ability to foresee. And simultaneously also they gradually lost the ability to foretell.
Mm.
Somewhere along the way, these habits of foreseeing and foretelling and accepting it, they gradually vanished from society as a whole. So when you look at families coming to us, very often the idea is बुरा मत बोलो,
Mm.
कुछ मत बताओ.
Mm.
In the sense कि अच्छा बोलोगे अच्छा होगा, बुरा बोलोगे बुरा होगा. But that is not so.
Mm.
Sometimes bad things have to be looked in the face.
Mm.
And because of this culture कि उसको मत बताओ, which goes both ways.
Mm.
Families don't want to hear, patients don't want to hear. And because it is not an easy job.
Mm.
So doctors also, in some ways, in a sense, dropped that. So we believe that it is very important for all of us to accept that honesty really is the best policy. If you want a patient, and I'm presuming that we are dealing with patients who are aware. I'm not talking of people who have dementia, but even there in the early years, they do understand what is going on.
Mm.
So for almost everything else other than dementia, it is important that there is transparency, that there is truth, and that what lies ahead must be faced. It is only when it is faced by everybody that you can navigate this already difficult journey. So, I mean, if there is one message that I want everybody to carry from here, it is that truth telling is important. I'm not saying ki, the whole of truth has to be dumped at one go. There is a skill in doing this. There is a way of doing this. It's called, we call it communication skills. And perhaps Rajam may even speak to you about it. But I look on it as primarily a doctor's responsibility, but also the family's responsibility to keep this line open. And to me, when the family says, usko mat batao, my heart sinks because I know that I will first have to work on the family, make them understand why it is important before I go further. On the other side, if I if I am the person making the diagnosis, okay, if I am the person making the diagnosis, then almost at the beginning I tell the family that उसको बताने की जिम्मेदारी आपकी नहीं है, मेरी है. I will be the one telling, because I mean, to be honest, it is something that I'm trained for.
Yeah.
And I have found that the immediate family, the people who are immediately, they are usually relieved. It really is ki, हाँ ठीक है, आप बता रहे, you take it over. But when it goes out into the wider family, the bigger family, then the whole our Indian culture of छुपो छुप बताओ मत बताओ, all that then comes up. So typically, I think as a doctor, if I am in the hot seat, then I don't evade my responsibility. And I wish that this was a wider phenomenon.
So,
I
as you
think
was,
Avni's question was also in the wake of COVID, where you don't have face-to-face consultations, and when you're ending up doing a lot of web consults, it is not easy. At the same time, I think it's the best time to rope in a family GP, even more so now. You have the family GP, you work with the family GP and the family, because he will not trust you. He's never seen your face before till you come on the Zoom consult. So it's best to work through the family GP, because the family physician then is known to the patient, and then you kind of slowly work. It cannot happen in one or two settings because nobody's open to it, and you are new and they don't know you. But I think it's family physicians should be roped in, because especially in such situations, because they cannot rush to the consultants and the specialists for everything. Even if you have responsible consultants like Dr. Roop, which are few and far in between, you still need to, in a Zoom consult or a telemedicine, you need the family GP, because these kind of are difficult to do over the digital thing. It's best done person to person, but it's tough. It's not going to be easy. It'll take a while for all of us to adjust.
yeah, we will once again pick up Avni's question in a bit. And I was, as Dr. Roop and Dr. Rajam was speaking, I was finding that this has such a connection with the theme of what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about what will be compassionate caring. So, if we want to talk about, I am going to be a caregiver, I'm most likely a caregiver. Um, you know, then if I'm not a caregiver today, I might be a caregiver tomorrow. And if I would like to be a compassionate caregiver, then I think it is absolutely important that there is an authentic sharing of information. That what I know about the prognosis is also what the patient knows. Sometimes I can feel protective for my loved one, that what if I told them, and what if they were not able to handle the news? Uh, that act is perhaps not a very compassionate act. Um, do you find that caregivers, tend to bring up certain behaviors that you find difficult to deal with? What is your experience of that?
Mm, are you asking me?
Sure. First you, then Rajam, Dr. Rajam.
For me, the behaviors are, uh, you know, I mean, one is of course with dementia that these are most challenging. But even otherwise, I mean, the patient does tend to become a little, what should I say, regress a little, become a little more immature, and that is part of the reaction to illness. But I mean, the problem of behavior and dementia is a whole different cup of tea. So let Rajam answer that for more straightforward situations and more common situations.
Yes. Dr. Rajam?
Can you repeat what the question was? Because I kind of had a little bit of a lag phase there.
Sure. So what I find is that, what I sense is that caregivers may become very protective. Caregivers may actually feel that they are really taking care of their loved one, And because they are taking care of their loved one is why they are withholding the information. So there is a certain anxiety. There is a certain anxiety to protect the person who is unwell. There might be some other challenges like, what about what will happen next? There is so much unknown. So what are some of those things that come out from caregivers that you find makes it difficult for the caregivers themselves to look after themselves as well as the patient?
So to be honest with you, I think this attributes across to disclosing diagnosis, to prognosis, to everyday up and down. So if you have a chronically ill patient, no 2 days are the same. There'll one issue on one day. It might not be medical issue. It could be a domestic issue. It could be a financial issue. It could be huge emotional issues. Maybe your own family, your own child has a school issue. So there are multiple things that happen. What I'm trying to focus here, and what I want to hear emphasize here, is that as much as possible, just like they say in the airlines, you need to look after yourself well if you have to look after somebody else. You can't be mentally or physically anywhere less than a close to 100% if you have to look at somebody who's both physically, emotionally, and mentally not there, being with an illness. So that is one thing. I think I cannot undermine the importance of caregivers looking after themselves in terms of adequate sleep, adequate diet, adequate relationships with people their age and what they like to do. It's important, even if it's necessary for you to get out of that place for half an hour and not be in that room. It just like how a mother leaves a child and goes to after maternity break, goes back to work. The fact that you're not a full-time mother doesn't mean you love your child any less. You need to look after your emotional and mental balance to look after somebody else. You can't do that 24/7 and 365 days. And I realized the various things that the caregivers either start saying is it could be that because they don't want to face a serious illness, sometimes they ignore symptoms. So they do reach the hospital late. They don't want to they don't want to, they kind of, because they're all bottling it up themselves, they don't want ABC to happen. So they probably sometimes keep saying, no, this can't be happening, or they are in denial themselves, because that's also a coping strategy for them. So these things, when addressed early, is not just helpful for the patient, but it's greatly, immensely helpful for the caregivers. And I think if the caregiver has a support in the medical team looking after the patient, that is, if there's any issue, at least flag it off. We are there to listen to you. Like I said before, support is extremely crucial, even if you can't offer solutions. So I think caregivers sometimes don't want to accept things. Caregivers don't report things that easily, because they said, oh God, this is going to take another trip to the hospital. It's going to set off another set of reaction. So it could be multiple ways in which either they are overprotective, or they kind of, after 1, 2, 3 times, they kind of start neglecting it, or they get frustrated, or they get angry, their own personal relationships break down. So there are multiple things in which the caregiving is affected, and therefore the patient's health is affected. So it's important to look after yourselves, because effectively it transfers to what actually the patient is going to experience. If you're going to be well, it's automatically sense. For example, I've felt this in the past 4 weeks when my mother is down with a vertebral fracture. Her pain levels are directly proportional to my mood. So if I haven't slept well the night because she has got up 3 times and I am kind of snapping at everybody at home, her pain levels are higher. She can sense the change. I mean, it is a subconscious thing. There is no conversation. There is nothing that is transcribed between us, but you can see the change in her mood. If I am smiling, she eats one more roti. It's a very odd equation, but it is there. So it's very important. But again, don't put that smile up just because you have to look happy. You need to get your emotional well-being from some other source, whether it's a phone call or a video call or a sibling. Call up your sibling, call up your friend, crib, complain about your parent, which I do to my sister in Melbourne. Not that she can take a flight and come here, but it helps, because if you went, you you kind of go back, recharge and rejuvenated, and you're a better caregiver also.
Yeah.
So sorry, Dr. Roop, please go
No,
ahead.
no, no, go ahead. I just agreed.
Yes, of course. I think that it's absolutely critical that, caregivers value. I think it's a huge dilemma that should patient care come first or should self-care come first? What comes first? What is more important? I mean, the obvious answer sometimes is that both are important, but there are sometimes meanings that we make that if I'm a caregiver, maybe the patient is more important, and I can look after myself at some other time, some later point in time. So self-care, like Dr. Rajam pointed out, might actually be easier said than done. What do you believe that could be some of the 2 or 3 things that caregivers must necessarily do so that they have a sense of well-being and they are looking after themselves? Dr. Roop?
One is, of course, to systematically organize respite.
Hmm.
Yeah. So you have to be a little, I know COVID times maybe you will not be able to. Otherwise, on a regular basis, other members of the family have to pitch in. They have to be there to take over. You have to be able to get out. You have to see that your vacation or whatever it is happens those days when you are out of the house and somebody else. Of course, I'm sure that there are people where this is absolutely not possible, but for the vast majority, it is possible, and it needs to be very, very clearly spelled out. Then the other thing that I think is important is exercise. I think it's very important for the caregiver, even if they are not used to doing some kind of exercise, meditation, exercise, yoga, whatever it is that works for you, build that into your routine and see that that part of your routine is literally sacrosanct. To the point, I've told somebody that it's okay if a medicine gets missed or a meal gets delayed. Don't think that is so important. You have to finish that part of your own duty to yourself first. So these are 2 things that I usually try and pay attention to when I'm dealing with a caregiver and when I'm asking them how things are working out.
We find, however, that caregivers, especially mothers or let's say wives in some cases, because I would think that very often 60 to 80% of the time, caregivers are women, right?
Yeah.
And they are likely to deprioritize their self-care.
Yeah.
They are likely to say that 2 things. One, I come last, or I can come last, or I can come after. And secondly, that I'm a hands-on caregiver. So I do everything myself. What are your thoughts about these 2 issues that might weigh down on the mind of the caregiver?
I'll pass that to Rajam.
Yeah, I think again, women, there are enough statistics, not just wives. I think it also continues the next generation of daughters who are also the biggest caregivers. And even amongst the daughters, there are some who feel they are better caregivers than the others. So there's a funny sibling rivalry even in how you look after your parents. So now the whole thing here is, like Dr. Roop said, when we are dealing with patients with chronic illnesses, we as doctors should address this upfront. Just like we dish out the prescription, the diet, the passive exercise for the patient, the care for the patient, we need to, when we foresee this is going to take a long time, when it comes from the doctor's mouth that the caregiving needs to be shared, the caregiving, everybody needs to be there at that meeting. So it's important to have a family meeting where all the siblings or all the children are around, so they realize the impact of this health on their family or of this diagnosis on their family. And when it comes from the doctor's prescription that it is important that you all share the responsibility, or there are going to be good days and bad days, you are in for a long haul, these things are necessary to say it from the doctors, because then these discussions are easier for the family to handle. Because usually if there's one carer who goes all the time, for some strange reason, it is either the youngest daughter or the single daughter or the daughter without a job, etc. They are the ones who get burdened by this, and somehow the whole family looks to them. I've had families who literally look at that daughter for names of the medicines, for what the patient, they are clueless of what the mother or father is on. Only one person is made the center. That is difficult. It's a bit of a burden for that caregiver, because somewhere that caregiver feels she is the one responsible for everything, this patient living and dying. That should not happen. It's extremely important for the doctors to notice that this person is being overburdened and address the whole family and say that you need to share responsibility, because that's where the respite will come. That's where the quality of caregiving will be. And it's not fair for that one person to have that burden. So, even that person realizes that he or she can make mistakes, and therefore it's very important. And I have realized that if as a doctor you bring it out in the family, it's easier for the family to settle rather than them adjusting to their own this. Sometimes it helps for us to say that. Unfortunately, like I said, we don't have move the focus out of the patient and the patient care to the extended family care, which is where I think palliative care makes a lot of sense, because we look at the family's needs and what the family and the patient go through during this journey as what we call as health related suffering.
That's true. So, but let's just say that doctors have to do this job, and let's say there are all kinds of doctors and they've had all kinds of experiences. They may not have had that conversation. And even if they've had the conversation, I'm guessing that in a family, somebody takes responsibility more than others, or somebody is just in a vantage position. It just today, for example, somebody is with the patient, so that person is responsible.
Yeah.
Right now, at that point that you are the caregiver, but the doctor has not had that conversation with the rest of the family. After this webinar, you have realized that actually there needs to be respite and there needs to be sharing of the load, so to speak. What should a caregiver do now?
So, if I may answer that, so multiple things that you can do, like to start with what Dr. Roop said. Important to sleep, important to exercise. If you can't get respite, you still need to, within your own framework. So, for example, you have friend circles, you can talk to them. I know you can't meet people a lot because of the social distancing. Second thing is also, what I feel is support groups. I think I read one question about children who are mentally challenged. How do we keep ourselves going? I think if you meet other families in the similar situation. So for example, you speak to a family member, you realize somebody else has had a similar situation. You share notes, you exchange notes so that at least you know what you're doing is correct. For example, again, coming back to my own personal experience, this vertebral fracture, I have never experienced it before. So I had to speak to my ortho friends in England or my friends here, some pain specialists. You get your own, kind of support system working via friends, via your family doctors. It's important at least to get going, because then you realize that this is going to take a long time, that you have to be patient, that, bed rest is important. You don't encourage sitting. These are the small kind of things that and ask your doctors for e-learning resources which are valid. Don't look at everything which is, because I think a lot of information is there on the net, but please ask people from reliable sources to find out what exactly you should be reading for your right information. So when you have correct information and you have the support, and probably also in touch with your family and friends via phone, internet, WhatsApp, etc., I think that's the best thing that to deal with in this present situation, because personal meetings are becoming less. But it's important to address the fact that you're stressed. Even counselors, you can reach out to counselors also if you can't handle the situation. Somehow that also is a big mental block amongst patients and families in our country. Why do I need to go to a counselor? Why do I need to speak to another human being? Why do I have to spend that extra cash to be? But it makes a lot of sense to get professional tips of how to cope with your anxiety, with your stress, with your situation that you're stuck in if you're the main caregiver. It helps to vent, because you yourself will be a better, calmer person to be able to look after your family.
So, I mean, that's a lot of input. Thank you, Dr. Roop. In your experience, what has been your experience towards taking counseling, for example, or counselors? Do you find that patients and caregivers take counseling support?
I yes and no.
Mm.
So it varies. It really depends on sometimes on the stage of the illness. So if in the early stages, many people find it difficult to accept. But
Mm.
as things go along, yes, they are more amenable to seeking help for something that is just about talking. And how do we get this? Sorry, let me. Neil? Yeah. So, how do you get these conversations going, especially when these resources are not also not easily available? Uh, I think doctors need to um, suggest this. We ourselves need to be aware that we are not, in those old days where in the joint family there was always one good old chachi or dadi or somebody who would listen to whatever you had to say and would do this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you have to really ask for somebody professional to help you with that.
Yeah.
And how should I put it? It's a culture that needs to change. You
I
said
would
that about support groups as well. The same thing applies there. So, I mean, what is a support group? A support group is basically a giant counseling system where
bunch of
everybody,
co-travelers, I think everybody going through the same journey, somebody a
yeah,
little ahead and somebody behind. I think being a part of that journey together gives you a sense of camaraderie, a
yeah,
sense of comfort. I think counseling falls under this whole umbrella of mental health, seeking support for mental health. It is a stigma. It is a thing that, you know, who needs a counselor or a psychotherapist if I can go do retail therapy? Who needs a counselor if I can simply go on a vacation? Or who needs a counselor if I have friends? But I think these are all myths, because perhaps mental health and professional help for your mental well-being is a basic infrastructure that caregivers need to build so that they can do long-term care for their loved one. Otherwise, it can be quite debilitating to deal with emotions of frustration and anger. They are, as it is, very difficult to express in our society.
yeah.
So I'm mindful of time. We are nearing about an hour, and I think what I would like to say is that the theme of our discussion was that how is it that we can offer compassionate caring, for the simple reason that many of us will be or are already caregivers. So um, compassionate caring, the message that I take away starts from self-care. and maybe having compassion for oneself and finding adequate information and resources. Um, Sorry, Dr. Roop.
No, no, no. Go ahead. I mean,
I, those were some of the key things. And I think reaching out to people and getting help, whether it is through other caregivers or it is with professional help through doctors or counselors, is the other important thing. I would think that the subject is fairly large. And I'm curious, I think some questions are already beginning to come. So maybe we will move on to the second section of questions and answers on the basis of this
sure.
discussion.
Sure.
Thank you. So I look at this question that says, uh, what are your thoughts on caregiver burnout? How can caregivers prevent burnout?
I think the most important thing is to recognize caregiver burnout, you know, that is the first step. Very often they just keep going on and chugging along and never realize it. Like yesterday, I was talking to Bhavna this morning about a patient I saw yesterday on the teleconsult. The elderly gentleman is the patient, and his wife was about early 70s. And I was talking to the son and the patient, and the wife was not even on the frame. From the chatting session, I realized that the wife is the main carer. So I insisted that I speak to the wife, and within speaking to her for 2 minutes, she broke down on the teleconsult. And the son interjected and said, I'm very surprised, doctor, that my mother is crying to you. She's the strongest member in our family. She's usually the one who's up and about and looks after my father. And I'm very shocked. I'm so sorry she's crying. And I told him exactly that. This is the recognition that she's had enough. She's also 71. She can't probably be doing everything. I know it's not easy for him to get a ward boy to look after his father for all his personal hygiene needs, but that doesn't mean it gets transferred to her 71-year-old mother. It must be hard on her to see a husband with whom she built a life to now be on the bed, not able to breathe. And that's the other thing. I feel it is very tough to look after patients like with dementia, etc., who are not even participating in a conversation, but to look after people who have advanced lung, renal, heart conditions, who are mentally with it, is another challenge. Because you have a patient who knows he's fully dependent, who knows he can't get up and wash himself or take a shower, and every time he's wanting to go to the toilet, it's almost like the patient is apologizing, sorry I'm bothering you, sorry I'm being a burden. It's very, very hard on the caregiver and the patient. I'm digressing here a bit. Here, I had to actually tell the son, please recognize the fact that your mother is having a burnout and please give her the support. She might not need physical support, just the fact that you're doing a great job, mom. We love you. Or telling the father, we look after my mother well. Don't worry about her. Or take her for a little walk, or buy her an ice cream, or let her listen to her famous Astha channel for half an hour. These things are the respite you can give in the COVID lockdown situations. Let her be out of that room for half an hour. So recognizing caregiver burnout is important. Supporting each other in the family is important. As far as possible, I know societies are not letting people come in, but take special permissions. If you want, sponsor a COVID test if possible. Keep a check, keep all your self hygiene at its best, and get some extra help if it's possible through your office or some agency if it's still working. For people who can afford it, of course. And so I think that is what is important, that each whoever is there in the house, you need to support each other, break the time, set a routine, give the person a break.
Yeah, I think it is also important, absolutely important for us to be compassionate as well-wishers. So if we are saying this, compassionate caring is our theme. So we might actually be the neighbor of a caregiver, and we might actually be the well-wisher or the distant cousin. And if we anticipate caregiver burnout, for us to say, yeah, that's a possibility, or to say that it can happen, but there is no stigma associated with being burnt out. So I think a lot of caregivers also find it shameful to accept that they could be burnt out.
True.
And,
Like I said in the beginning, they don't think it's right to complain. They
correct.
think it's their duty to look after. It's not fair to be frustrated, angry, irritable, you
That's
know.
right.
So
That's
they
right.
feel it's not right to complain about being the caregiver. The
Yeah.
seva bhavna, that I am the one who's blessed to look after,
Yeah.
but that can have its own toll. Obviously, it can be not easy all the time. You can't be a compassionate caregiver 24/7, 365 days.
Correct. There is the idea of
It's
compassion.
okay to not be okay.
Yes. Anish, will you help us with who has raised their hand for a question?
I think there was a question about the fact that find out the wishes of the patient involved. It's totally correct. You must involve the patient and find out what the patient wants, because it will really make your journey much easier. I think Prakash has asked that. I think it's autonomy, which again is something that we don't look at often. We must look at patients, what they want. It easily sets you your guidelines and goals, and automatically there are many things you don't have to do.
That is
There
true.
was also this bit about caregivers having preliminary knowledge of the disease. Yeah, we've already covered that, I think, in the sense that looking for e-resources, or at least asking your doctor what is a good site, or where is it good to read up about the disease. Yes, the caregiver does need to be aware.
I know, Dr. Roop, you do a lot of work with ensuring that patients, especially those who may not have their mental faculties intact, have an opportunity or make it a point to express their desires or their wishes. So I think caregivers have a role there to be mindful that it is not just their need or their desire that the loved one lives longer or is around or whatever, but it is also important for you as a compassionate caregiver to look at the needs of actually the patient.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk to that
Yeah.
point a little bit?
So actually, I'll have to make a pitch for something that I'm doing tomorrow.
Yes.
Tomorrow, I'm going to be speaking about the living will and advance care planning. Maybe Bhavna can put it up on her site as well, so you can look that up.
Yes, we
But
will.
it's important, of course, this is important for all of us, not just for patients, caregivers. Everybody needs to be aware that uh, we need to look ahead and to make our plans for the final journey. But uh, for the patient, if the patient ever brings this up, do not duck it.
Mm.
Do not avoid talking. Don't say, ye baat mat karo.
Mm.
That is actually wrong.
Mm.
I'm not sure that you may have the immediate resources to deal with that. This is a difficult conversation.
Mm.
But if it does come up, then I think it is important to say that yes, we will talk about it,
Yeah.
and then try and get the resources to be able to have that conversation.
Yeah.
It's I can't emphasize that enough. Rajam, do you want to come in on
No.
that?
See, it's very rare in our country that patients bring it up, first of all. So, like Dr. Roop says, when they bring it, don't miss that chance at all. It's now it has become a norm for me to bring it up with patients, and it is an extremely difficult task to see to it that the patient and the family are on the same page. Either the patient is ready to talk, discuss, and walk the talk, but the family is not ready, or so it is not easy. So when you have a opportunity, don't miss it. And that could be even the family members. When you are talking or having a moment with your patient or the care or the family member, and he or she says something like, this family yesterday, the patient concerned was a retired MBBS doctor, and he was very clear he didn't want to go to the hospital, and he didn't want to have any aggressive treatment. But the son was not somehow saying, he kept saying that, what will I do in an emergency, in a COVID situation? So your father is already telling you what he wants to do. So sometimes you need to be the mediator because they feel that the patient is saying this in frustration, or the patient is saying without understanding the situation and he just wants an easy way out of. But it's important to sometimes be the mediator saying, listen to the patient.
Correct. Um, I think also it is important that the mediator need not always be the doctor. Sometimes we are like I say, well-wishers of caregivers. So as extended family members, if we can be gentle and kind and compassionate, we can create the space and the legitimacy for the caregiver to pick up difficult conversations. I can see a hand that Alicia has raised. Alicia, would you like to speak your question?
Yeah, I thank. First of all, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. First of all, thank you for mentioning that care along with the patients, the caregivers also need to be recognized their needs. I have two practical concerns. So I mentioned one. One is that during the COVID period, and I lack a certain practical knowledge. See, for example, we've already read that the healthcare system is already burdened, and in the hospitals and all, there is no more space to take patients in. And I also read something in the newspaper of in the certain hospitals that overcharging patients, and it was given in the newspaper, and that has created a little bit of anxiety in me. So I want to ask a practical question: is in such a situation, if supposing I or my mother is like we suspect it's COVID and
Can
all.
you can you speak closer to the mic? We are missing a part of your conversation. Yeah.
So in such a situation where you don't know which hospital you can go to, for like what I would require some kind of practical information as to which hospital is available for the patient to go to, something like that, you know.
Yeah.
Are you talking with respect to COVID symptoms or already existing pre-medical conditions?
COVID symptoms.
So that is depending on the area you are. You need to identify the hospitals which are, going to look after you. Now, for example, in this area in South Bombay, it is definitely public hospital is Kasturba and Nair, while private is, we have Bhatia, Saifi, Breach Candy, who have designated COVID areas. So depending on the area that you are, you please identify the hospitals which will look after you. Regarding overcharging, etc., these are problems which private hospitals have. And I think there is some cap which the government has said, that we need to put for COVID patients. So hopefully, fingers crossed, everybody will behave themselves. But yes, the healthcare system is burdened with COVID for sure. But there are hospitals who are dedicated for COVID and who are designated as non-COVID. So depending on what your symptoms are, you need to go to those places because you can't go cross city. You have to go within your areas. That's the whole point of lockdown and social distancing.
Containing it as well. I think there is a resource available, Alicia, and we will be happy to share that with you. There's a resource of by area hospitals that one can get access to for COVID related support. Yes, yeah, non-COVID or other conditions might be slightly different and difficult these times. Dr. Roop, do you have anything to add to that?
No. That's quite right. I mean, but for non-COVID, I think this is probably the time when, and I think if you are in a long-term caregiving situation, probably the best thing that you can do, and this is something that at this time is even more important, is to identify a good GP around you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't emphasize this enough.
Yes.
I have seen so very often for small things, uh, people land up at the main hospital or to the consultant. That's not okay. The consultant is not going to be always available. And the consultant also needs a partner on the spot. So, and unfortunately, there are not enough GPs around. But if you have access to somebody, please, that is a treasure.
Mm.
You must maintain that communication, that link. Do not let it wither.
Mm.
Rajam?
Yes, and also, if possible, if your GP is the kind who is happy to talk to your specialist, that liaison is also extremely precious, because at least now in this condition, you can then ask the GP to look for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then communicate in medical terms to your specialist by email, WhatsApp, whatever it is, and you get the right kind of advice without ever stepping out of your house and risking yourself for COVID in a
Okay.
pre-existing medical condition.
Somebody said, what is a GP?
GP is a general
General practitioner or family physician.
Yeah.
Yes. So we spoke about some of the issues and some of the challenges about caregivers and caregiving at this point. We spoke about the need for self-care, the challenges of self-care, and sometimes social pressures and norms that can come into play. I'm curious if there are any other questions. We also spoke about how absolutely critical it is to engage with the patient and maybe have a partnership between the patient and the caregiver. I think there was a comment over here. I'm just going back to look that up about Gitanjali says that, is it possible that one way to help both the caregiver and the patient is to help them recognize that while they are dealing with the illness, it is actually a partnership exercise. The patient is at the heart, however, the caregiver is impacted. Many times we see that caregiver, out of love and responsibility, take over the scenario and feel burdened. However, the disease is being felt and borne by the patient. That is so true. Is enabling a partnership a better way to ensure that this difficult journey is better managed? In my experience of working with caregivers, and I'll just say that before I invite Dr. Roop, is I find that sometimes caregivers tend to become these superheroes and become these people in charge and say that I'm going to fix this and I'm holding fort. And in that enthusiasm, sometimes even forget what the patient might want. What do you have to say of your experience, Dr. Roop?
Yeah, so that's why I said that everybody, not just, I mean, obviously the doctor, but the family, they have to, if uh, you have to be aware of when this conversation starts off, because it can happen at odd times, it can happen at social times, it can happen just out of the blue. And when that conversation happens, don't say, "Buri baat hai, baat mat karo."
Mm.
Never say that.
Never.
Never say that.
Yeah.
Except that this is perhaps, I mean, if the patient is saying it, then this is the patient actually asking for help
Yeah.
for planning that journey ahead.
Yeah.
And if you need resources for that, I mean, Bhavna is a good place to start. You can always, yeah, I mean, you can do this guiding bit. So people who are already on this group, I think you can start with that.
Yeah.
Because at the end, we need to offer you practical solutions as well. Let her point out where you might get support for this.
Yes, I do think the whole subject of death and dying and the ability to deal with that is a whole new subject that is possibly something that caregivers have to deal with. And maybe we can pick that up in another conversation.
Sure.
We are at time, maybe a couple of minutes over as well, but I see Yashna.
Yashna wants to ask something.
Yes, Yashna.
Hello, actually, I think Dr. Roop would know me.
Yeah.
My dad has been diagnosed with ALS. So, till before the COVID situation, the symptoms were there, but they were not very evident. He was able to do a lot more. But in the last 1 month, we've seen a major deterioration, due to which even I have recently gotten married. So, I managed to come back to my parents' house to help my mom. But now, what I feel at home is my mother had acceptance, but in her mind she had that it's going to take time. It's not going to happen so soon. Like I've read up enough and I know it'll take time. But now I feel that because she's seen it happen so fast, she's somewhere not wanting to talk about it. How much ever I'm trying, like me being a speech therapist myself, somewhere I understand how this is going to go. I am mentally prepared also for how and what is going to happen next. But with her, I've been trying to get her to convince her to talk to somebody. Like even today, she's not a part of the support group. I am. Even this meeting I am attending. Like, because she's like, no, I'm fine. I can deal with it. Like she's a principal herself. So she's done counseling for students herself. But when it comes to her, she's not accepting any help. And I think my dad somewhere is still accepting I need help with things, but she gets upset even after she helps him do it. Ki, oh no, what must he be feeling? So I think that like since I have come here, I can see a tension break in the house at least. But I feel there was this very untouched walking on eggshells going on here earlier. So how do I get my mom to really talk to somebody? Because I know I'm not the right person, so somebody else can help her.
Yeah, in this situation,
Gotcha.
clarity doesn't begin at home. It can't be you doing this because it's extremely difficult. It's too much emotional overplay. I think it's also too soon for your mom. 1 month and all this other uncertainties, the way the whole country, the world, the whole situation is also very difficult for normal people to accept. So it's too soon, I think. But I think what you're doing is great. The fact that you're constantly trying, but maybe it'll help for you to suggest. Maybe, does your dad be able to still write or talk?
Oh,
yeah, he's able
Yeah,
to
yeah.
talk. Writing is a
Can
little
he tell your mother that so do you think, because you feel he's more practical about?
Yeah, he is. In fact, since I have come, he himself, like most of the work about related to him, be it his exercise, be it anything, I've taken over so that she gets a little bit of
Correct,
time. So
correct.
I'm still working through online. So I schedule work around his schedule and everything. So
But
I've been
you
here.
can tell him to slowly start telling her that, in a manner in which saying, I can see that you're, worried about something. Do you think you can talk to somebody? Do you want professional? Yashna was telling me that there is this support group. Would you like to talk to a person? Maybe she doesn't like to come to a group of people. It's not
Correct.
easy to come and talk
Of
to a
course,
group
yeah.
of strangers about what you feel. Maybe you can put her in touch with Bhavna, or you can put her in touch with a counselor that Bhavna recommends. Just let it come from him. Then maybe it's a different equation that they share. That
Of
is what
course, yeah.
I think. Because currently you cannot have a fourth person, or maybe Dr. Roop can send you an email. I don't know how it works. That could be a professional way of getting, or Dr. Roop sending would be professional. Your father talking to her could be an emotional way to push her or nudge her to get some help, because she will need help.
Yashna, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say this publicly, but last time I did feel that this was coming
Yeah,
when we
I
met.
see. I was somewhere aware of it, but even with mom, if you noticed, even to meet you, she wouldn't come in. She'll send me. I'm the one who's doing everything, be it his medicines, like everything is being handled by me. Even when I was not staying here and I was staying with my in-laws and husband, I was still the one coordinating his physio sessions, his appointments, everything.
I'm feeling very torn, and I do really want to support you, Yashna, but I feel that, we are on a time.
No, I can understand,
No,
Gaveen.
she
No
can
problem.
get in touch with me. She has my
Yes,
number, so
I'll do
that's
that.
okay.
Yes,
Thank you so
I'm going to, I'm going to have to call time, but I'm going to say this, that, these are important conversations and they probably take long time, but we will cover various elements of well-being that are absolutely critical for caregivers, that are important for other members in the family. There are some tips and techniques in which you can go about it so that caregivers can build an approach. You can build resilience, and you can enroll other people. So what could be some ways of having difficult conversations, building a partnership with various other people? So watch this space, and maybe access the resources that we put out. So if you access our website, if you look at our social media handles, you will be able to find lots of resources that will help you handle yourself as well as support your mom. And that's true for many others as well. We would also encourage you to see how useful the Caregiver Sathi app can be for you. Please download that and see how that you can use it to organize yourselves. We will have a specific session to cover these things. It's a very broad topic. I would like to bring the second section to close, and we are busting time limits. But I would encourage each one of you to please give us feedback. Maybe give us a rating on a scale of 1 to 10 about what you felt about today's webinar, where 1 is the least score and 10 is the highest. Also, please give us qualitative feedback and suggestions as to what is it that you would like us to cover in the forthcoming webinars, so that we can organize them and schedule them. So do give us your ideas, and of course watch the space. We will be announcing some that we have planned, where we will be taking each of these ideas in greater detail.
Okay.
So before we hang up, I just wanted to say that hats off to all the caregivers, even more so during the COVID lockdown. I think it takes a separate this thing to be on your own, literally and figuratively, because a lot of help is missing. A lot of medical help is also missing. Your siblings, your children, they're all away to various parts of the family stuck. And so I mean, hats off to you. Please don't belittle yourself or anything, and reach out if you need anything, email and SMS. Bhavna's contacts. If you need any kind of special help, please feel free to get in touch. We are here. We want to support you. We may not be able to solve your problems or be there physically for you, but we are there in it for you, with you in this journey. It's not easy. We are all at various levels of caregiving. So do reach out.
I would like to, Dr. Roop, would you like to say something to close before I formally thank you?
No, I think Rajam has already said it, and
Yeah.
I think I'll just second her thoughts.
Okay. So, second, echo, ditto. Thank you very much.
He has been my teacher, and I probably talk and think like him. So
that is true. So, thank you very much, Dr. Roop and Dr. Rajam. Thank you for taking the time and spending with us, sharing your thoughts. We look forward to, being able to reach out to caregivers that are on this call, and maybe many others. And thank you for guiding Caregiver Sathi as well. So we are very grateful. Thank you very much.
thank you.
Bye.
Have a good evening, all of you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Have a very good evening. Look after yourselves. Take care. And like Dr. Roop says, don't give up on that meditation and the exercise.
Yes.
It's also for the healthcare professionals, I think.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All of us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Very good.
Bye.
Bye-bye.